You don't get angry because people are annoying. You get angry because something inside you agrees with them. You call it patience when you hold back, and maturity when you stay quiet, but beneath that calm surface something is watching, keeping score, remembering every slight, every tone, every look that felt wrong. You tell yourself it's normal, anyone would react this way, anyone would feel disturbed when disrespected, misunderstood, ignored, or subtly challenged. But if that were true, why does the anger linger long after the moment ends, replaying conversations in your head long after the other person has moved on? Why does it feel personal even when you know logically it shouldn't be? Why does someone else's behavior seem to reach inside you and rearrange your emotional state without permission? And why does the part of you that wants peace still secretly crave the moment you feel justified being upset? This isn't about controlling anger or becoming unbothered or learning to stay calm. It's about something much quieter, much deeper, and far less comfortable than most people are willing to look at. But to understand that, we need to question what you think is actually happening when someone gets under your skin. Most people believe anger appears when someone crosses a line, breaks a rule, or violates an expectation that should have been obvious. It feels like a simple equation. Someone does something irritating, therefore a reaction naturally follows, as if emotions were mechanical responses rather than internal movements. From this view, staying calm becomes an act of discipline, a mental grip tightened just enough to prevent emotional overflow. So, you try to control reactions by controlling behavior, monitoring words, watching tone, rehearsing patience before it is needed. When anger slips through, you blame timing, stress, exhaustion, hunger, or the other person's lack of awareness. This explanation feels reasonable because it protects the idea that you are mostly in control until circumstances overwhelm you. It suggests that with enough self-control, enough distance, enough wisdom, emotional peace becomes a permanent state. You start believing anger is something that happens to you rather than something that emerges from you. That belief is comforting because it removes responsibility without removing dignity. It allows you to feel victimized without feeling weak, reactive without feeling reckless, justified without feeling exposed, and it keeps the problem external safely located in traffic, rude comments, passive aggression, or people who know exactly what they're doing. From here, the solution seems obvious. Change the environment, set boundaries, avoid triggers, surround yourself with better people. This is why advice about anger usually focuses on techniques, distractions, breathing strategies, mental refraining, and sometimes those things appear to work, at least temporarily, reinforcing the belief that control was always the missing piece. But if control were the answer, you wouldn't keep encountering the same emotional reaction in different situations with different people wearing different faces. You wouldn't feel calm for days, then suddenly irritated by something small, something almost embarrassing to admit. You wouldn't feel anger rise before you consciously decide anything at all. This belief explains a lot, but not enough, and the gaps are where things begin to feel uncomfortable. Because beneath the illusion of control, something else is quietly operating, and it doesn't respond to effort or intention. And this is where most people misunderstand what's really happening. If this is already making sense to you, it means you're starting to notice patterns most people never see. Subscribe and let's keep exploring how the mind really works. Now, this is where things start to get uncomfortable. The first unsettling truth is that anger doesn't always arise from the outside. It often emerges from something inside, something older, quieter, and far less conscious than thought. It begins as a small twitch of irritation, a flicker of tension in your body, a pulse that seems to belong to someone else, yet it is unmistakably yours. You replay the scenario over and over, not because the other person is clever or cruel, but because your mind is searching for permission to feel what it already wants. Sometimes you notice it in the subtle tightening of your chest, the way your jaw clenches, or the sharp inhale that comes before a thought even forms. You start to realize the anger feels automatic, yet it's not an accident. It has a reason, a logic that doesn't need words, a pattern you learned long before you could name it. The discomfort arises when you see that your mind isn't simply reacting, it is rehearsing, preparing, defending a part of yourself you rarely acknowledge. And the quietest part of that rehearsal is not about right or wrong. It's about survival, about preserving an internal world that fears collapse when boundaries feel threatened. But survival of the psyche doesn't mean peace. It often means holding on to the very tension you wish you could release. Keeping old stories alive in new arguments, invisible yet persistent. You may think knowing this changes nothing, but awareness is already a first crack, a fissure in the belief that your anger is simply a response to the world. And as soon as you notice the pattern, you start to wonder if the problem isn't the people who bother you, but something you've been carrying with you all along. But to understand why, we need to look deeper into how the brain learned this behavior. From the moment we are born, our brains are scanning for patterns, for signals that indicate safety or danger, comfort or threat, acceptance or rejection. Anger, like fear, is not random. It is a response honed over time, a signal the brain learned to associate with disruption, disrespect, or misalignment of expected outcomes. Early experiences, even subtle ones, teach the nervous system that certain behaviors from others are dangerous, not physically, always, but emotionally, socially, or psychologically. A scolding parent, a critical sibling, a friend who teases too sharply, these moments are encoded as predictive data. Your brain doesn't say that was unfair. It says remember this, anticipate it, react next time. Over time, these small moments accumulate into a vast internal map of triggers, each linked to neural pathways that fire almost automatically. By the time you are an adult, the brain doesn't need logic, reason, or morality to ignite irritation. It simply follows the patterns it has learned to protect you. This is why someone cutting you off in traffic can feel like a violation, far more personal than it objectively is. Your brain reads it through the lens of all past threats, all unresolved tension, all unacknowledged emotion. Conditioning is silent but relentless. It doesn't consult you, it doesn't ask permission. It nudges, whispers, and sometimes yells, sculpting reactions before conscious thought intervenes. Even when you imagine yourself as calm, rational, and emotionally balanced, these old neural pathways are humming in the background, ready to replay their scripts at the faintest cue. And the curious part is that your brain doesn't see this as a problem, it sees it as efficiency. It is optimizing survival, even if that survival feels inconvenient or embarrassing in modern life. Every time anger emerges, every time irritation flares, your brain is silently receiving a reward, reinforcing the cycle, making it easier for next time, making it harder to let go. And the payoff isn't always obvious, it is subtle, hidden in emotion, identity, and ego, and it is here that the mind's secret calculus begins. Anger gives the brain something it craves, a sense of control in a world that often feels unpredictable and overwhelming. When irritation rises, a tiny part of you feels justified, powerful, validated, a signal that you are protecting yourself, even if externally nothing changes. It's not about the other person. It's about what your nervous system receives in return, a subtle chemical reward that feels like clarity, like correctness, like importance. There is comfort in conflict, in the belief that someone else is at fault, that the world is misaligned, that your moral compass or personal standards are under threat. This payoff explains why letting go feels difficult, why rational reasoning rarely extinguishes the flame. Part of you is secretly reluctant to release the reward. You may notice yourself replaying conversations late at night, imagining responses you didn't give, savoring the indignation as if it were nourishment. Even the smallest micro-violations, tone of voice, glance, delayed response can trigger the familiar rush because your brain has learned to treat them as meaningful. And the more you resist, the more entrenched the cycle becomes. Your nervous system doesn't understand that peace is desired. It only knows that reacting has produced predictable emotional outcomes. The payoff is quiet yet persistent. Anger is, paradoxically, comforting. It signals awareness, engagement, survival, and sometimes superiority, without ever demanding that anyone else change. And when you recognize this, it becomes slightly uncomfortable, because the part of you that seeks peace is now facing the part of you that secretly profits from agitation. And this payoff is more than chemical. It begins to intertwine with how you see yourself, leading to something far more profound. Over time, these patterns of irritation and defense become stitched into your sense of self, invisible threads that shape who you believe you are. You think of yourself as someone quick to notice injustice, someone principled, someone sensitive enough to detect subtle disrespect that others overlook. The behaviors that once felt situational now feel essential, as if releasing them would erase a part of your identity, a part that defines your boundaries and your worth. Logic offers no solution here. Explaining why the anger is unnecessary rarely matters, because identity is not swayed by reason, it is preserved by continuity. Even when you try to change, you feel friction, tension, and unease, because shifting this behavior threatens the image you have maintained, consciously or unconsciously, for years. It is the reason old grudges persist, why you can rehearse irritation long after the event, why subtle provocations feel magnified in personal significance. You begin to see that calming yourself is not a matter of technique or effort, it is a negotiation with the part of you that believes it cannot survive without this pattern. And the irony is that most people never notice this, never pause to see that they are defending themselves against themselves. The identity trap is invisible but heavy, a weight carried quietly under the guise of protection, correctness, or principle. And yet, noticing it does not fix it. Recognition alone is unsettling because it hints at the possibility that the self you know is not the self you thought you controlled. But there is a way to see this differently, to witness the trap without struggling against it, and this is where a subtle shift begins. What if anger is not a problem to solve but a mirror reflecting the hidden contracts you have made with yourself over time? It is not a failure of discipline or morality, but a signal, a quiet message from the parts of you that are hyperalert, cautious, or unacknowledged. When viewed this way, irritation loses its sting and instead becomes information, a subtle indicator of expectations, fears, and long-held assumptions about how life should unfold. The mind, in this perspective, is not a tyrant demanding drama. It is a reporter quietly noting when something feels misaligned with its internal rules. This shift does not erase emotion. It does not silence discomfort or remove tension. It simply changes the lens through which it is experienced. You begin to notice patterns without judgment, recognizing triggers as old signals rather than current assaults. And the sensation of anger starts to feel less like a trap. It is like observing waves from a distance rather than being swept away, acknowledging their force while no longer mistaking them for your permanent state. This perspective invites curiosity rather than correction, reflection rather than reaction, and awareness rather than control, though the temptation to intervene remains ever present. And the subtle truth is that simply noticing does something profound. It shifts the allegiance of attention away from the story and toward the observer. From here, a quiet internal change begins, one that does not demand effort, struggle, or techniques, but simply a gentle reorientation of awareness. And as this quiet change unfolds, it allows something deeper to emerge without force, something almost imperceptible but profoundly altering. You may notice it first as a small pause, a subtle space opening between stimulus and reaction, as if the world has momentarily slowed down. The body relaxes before the mind has consciously decided to, and the familiar clench of tension loosens just enough to feel unusual. It is not dramatic, nor is it labeled. It is a quiet shift that passes unnoticed if you rush, but unmistakable if you pause and feel it. You start observing your thoughts as passing clouds, noticing the irritation flicker without grabbing it, and sensing the rhythm of your mind without judgment. This awareness is not control, and it is not suppression. It is something else entirely, a witnessing presence that tolerates movement without identification. Even old narratives, the ones you rehearsed endlessly, lose their immediate urgency. They continue to exist but no longer dictate your internal state. There is a subtle relief in this, a quiet space where the mind once insisted on a story of provocation and defense. It is as if the brain is allowed to have its patterns without needing your full allegiance, and the tension between stimulus and reaction begins to ease. This is not a permanent state, nor does it require mastery. It is a subtle shift that deepens simply by observation and patience. And in this space, reflection becomes possible, the kind that looks inward without judgment, noticing who is observing and what has always been there waiting quietly. Look closely, and you realize the disturbance you once blamed on others has always been a conversation within yourself. Anger is not an invader, it is a messenger, a reflection of the parts of you that demand acknowledgement, validation, or even quiet recognition. You may notice old reactions arise, yet the pause has grown longer, the space wider, the sense that something need not be fixed at all. It is in that space that identity softens, not by logic or discipline, but by witnessing, by seeing the automatic responses without claiming them as truth. And in that witnessing, a quiet self emerges, one that does not require justification, nor does it insist on defense, nor depend on others to feel whole. It is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it shifts everything: your relationship to irritation, to anger, to perceived offenses, to the internal narrative that once dominated your mind. You are not your anger. You are not your irritation. You are the awareness in which they arise and dissolve. And when you see this, a kind of internal silence appears, not empty, but full of something wiser, calmer, and quietly attentive. It is here, in the reflection, that the realization settles. Peace was never a goal to attain. It was a state always available if you could simply notice. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that this reflection does not end, it continues, quietly shaping your experience from within. The truth is subtle. No one will make you angry without your mind agreeing, yet this agreement is rarely conscious, rarely admitted, rarely understood. You leave each encounter changed not by the other person, but by the dialogue within yourself, by the habits, expectations, and reactions you carry silently. There is no final solution, no mastery to be achieved, only the continual noticing, the quiet shift, the subtle widening of awareness that changes everything without announcing itself. You may replay this later, consider it deeply, or notice it in moments that once provoked irritation, the mind as old habits flickering but no longer claiming ownership. And as this reflection settles, a question lingers, quietly, for you to carry. If anger is only ever a story your mind tells itself, what happens when the story stops?